I find it so fascinating that you have turned out to be so nice and so kind, because there is very much a world in which most people would have gone down this route, would have ended up just bitter and angry. You've gone the complete opposite direction, so I can't wait to get into this with you. I think the best place to start with you specifically is just tell me about where you grew up. Where are you from? What was going on in little Stephanie's life?
All right. So I grew up in a very small town called Hopedale, Massachusetts, and it was created to be, well, it was in the mid-1800s when it was started. It was a social experiment, and it was created to be the perfect utopian society. It's very interesting. And I was, after, you and I first started talking about this, I kind of like went down the rabbit hole of looking into it. And it was actually one of the societies that were created like that actually functioned well for a decent amount of time. And I mean, I wasn't alive in the 1850s. I'm old, but I'm not like that old. But the whole platform behind the town, which I found very interesting, was they were very much interested in having equal rights for men and women. They were very interested in having equal rights for all races. They felt like people should be doing things that are lighting them up, that aren't just like industrial work. So that was kind of like the background to the town that I grew up in. And when I was growing up, it was a very, very sweet town. Like, it was, I think I graduated with 39 other people. It was really, really tiny. But it was sweet. And I know that experience can go one way or another. But everybody that I went to school with was really, really sweet. And I had a really great childhood. I have a great family. My parents are wonderful. They're back there over there somewhere. Woo, yeah.
You guys did good.
I have a brother and sister, and we've always just had a really, really great relationship. So my whole experience growing up was really, it was like fairly idyllic. It was nice.
What did you want to be when you were a child?
Well, when I was a child, so when I was finishing up high school and I was going into college, I really wanted to be in the FBI. So my undergraduate degree is in criminology and law. So little Steph went to school and was like, I want to study about serial killers. So that's kind of what I did all throughout the course of my college education. And then I finished school and realized, well, first of all, I was too young to take the test to become an FBI agent. And also, that's not really like my life's work. So I was like, okay, so I finished college and I was like, I'm going to go on one job interview. And if I don't get the job, then I'm going to go to law school. So I go on this one job interview. It's 2001, 2002. It was 2002. And I get the job. It's in real estate. It's the height of like the crazy real estate boom there. I know nothing about real estate. Like, I don't know what a title is. I don't know what a mortgage is, a deed. I don't know anything about this. But they hire me because they're just looking literally for like any warm bodies just to do the work. So I did that for a couple years, and then I realized it was like soul-killing work for me at that time. So I decided, one of my dear friends was an attorney, and she was going to get her master's of law at Pepperdine in California. And she showed me a photo of it, and this is kind of before, we definitely didn't have like cell phones that we were using. There wasn't social media and all that stuff. She shows me a photo of this, and I'm like, yeah, I want to go there. I'm like, if you get into that school, I'll move there with you. So she calls me and she's like, hey, I got into the school. So I packed up all of my stuff and I moved to California. And I remember being in the plane. It was a JetBlue plane. It had like the little screen in the front that has like where you're going. I remember being like halfway over the country and being like, I've never been to California. This might have been a bad idea. So I get there and I start working. And I was actually just going to kind of take some time off. My mom and I actually went to bartending school for like the summer beforehand. So I would drag her to Worcester, Mass every weekend, and we'd go and we'd make like these fake cocktails, and we graduated or whatever. So that was all I was going to do in California. And I got headhunted by this company, and I started doing commercial real estate. And I was kind of like, oh, all right, well, this is kind of fun. I enjoy this. Bless you. And am I?
Yeah, you're good. It checks out for you.
It's fine. So my whole plan when I first moved there, I was like, I'm just going to be there for a year. I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. And I kind of settled in, and I really enjoyed the people that I met, and I was enjoying what I was doing. And I remember I was talking to my best friend, and I said to her, I feel like I just need a sign, like something to tell me if I should stay here or if I should go home. And she's like, well, you'll find it. Like, something will come to you. So that night, my girlfriends and I go out. We're walking back home after, going out for the evening. I get robbed at gunpoint. Like, someone comes up to me, puts a gun to my head, and it was like, give me your money. I'm like, 26, I don't have any money, but here's my purse. I give them all my stuff. They run off. And I remember calling my girlfriend the next day, and I was like, so I think I got the sign that I need. I think I'm gonna come home. So I ended up moving back home.
Hold on, you just said this very casually. You just had an experience that no one in this room has ever had before. You got robbed at gunpoint?
It was wild.
How terrifying was that?
It was terrifying. So we're walking home and we're just kind of laughing and having, a lot of fun. And there's these couple, I think it was 3 men walking towards us, and I didn't think anything of it. And there's 3 of my girlfriends walking in a row, and one of them all of a sudden just took off. And I look over, I'm like, what is she doing? And then within 2 seconds, this guy's got a gun on my forehead, and he's, telling me, give me all your stuff. I'm like, okay, fine, you can have it. And she said, because when this all kind of finished and she came back, I was like, why did you run? She said, I just didn't like the way they were walking towards us. Clearly, she was a little bit more intuitive than I was at that time, because I didn't honestly think anything of it. That was tough. It wasn't... It was a tough thing to process. My roommate looked at me, so it happened on a Friday night. It was Sunday night. She looked at me and she said, I don't really want to pry, but you haven't said anything for like 2 days. And I'm a talker. I was like, oh, I think I might be a little traumatized by this. So it was a thing. I had, it was hard being, like, I wouldn't walk on the same side of the road as somebody. Like, if I was walking my dog down the street and I saw somebody walking at me, I would always, like, cross the street. And I did that for a good couple of years. It was a tough thing to work through, yeah.
Okay, so that was the sign to leave.
That was the sign. I was like, I'm not taking this as a sign that, like, you're supposed to stay here. I feel like that's the sign to leave. So I left.
And where'd you go and what'd you do?
So I moved back home. My parents were living in Hopkinton, Mass. at the time. I went back, and I think I was with them for a little bit, maybe for the summer. And at that point, I was like, I'm old. So I'm like I'm 26 or 27. And I'm like, I really need to figure out, like, life's work at this moment. And I had always wanted to teach. So teaching had always been really interesting to me. So I decided to go back to school to get my master's so I could begin teaching. So I went back to school for that. I believe, how timelines get so fuzzy sometimes, I believe it was probably in the middle of schooling or at the end of schooling, I got diagnosed with ovarian cancer and had to...
How old are you at this point?
I was 29.
Wow.
So I was 29. They found like a football-sized tumor in my abdomen that had to be yanked out. And then they found out it was cancer, so I had to go through some surgeries with that. But I ended up finishing getting my master's there, and I started teaching I started teaching 4th grade right after that. I taught 4th grade for a couple of years, and then from there, I started teaching middle school.
When you were delivered that news about cancer, what did that feel like?
Oh, it was terrible. So my poor father actually was in my house when it happened. So, when I went in for surgery, they were kind of like, you're super young. This is probably not anything, but we do need to operate. We need to take this out. So I'm kind of thinking, it was the end of May. I was a school teacher. I was like, I'm just kind of getting an extended summer vacation, maybe lose a couple pounds from the surgery. So I get a call a week later, and the doctor says to me over the phone, we're going to need you to come back, and we need you to bring somebody. And I said to the lady on the phone, I was like, I have cancer, don't I? And she said, well, we really don't like to say that over the phone. And I was like, well, jig's up. Like, I feel like, like I kind of know. Within like 4 minutes later, my dad was working and just happened to drive by my house. Unless he knew, I don't know. We'll have to talk about that after. But he ended up walking into my house like 5 minutes later, and he looked at me and I was like, Dad, I have cancer. And, it was scary. It was scary, but in the moment, I just kind of went into like, all right, you just kind of have to like dig your heels in and deal with this. So the whole time I was dealing with it, it was just kind of like, I'm fine, everything's gonna be fine. And I remember a year later, it was almost to the date of it, where it hit me, and I was like, oh my God, that's terrifying. And then I think the processing came from there.
How long did you deal with it?
So it didn't spread. So I didn't have to have chemo or radiation, but they did have to do a second surgery after the first one to figure out if it had spread. They called it the staging surgery. I've always called it like my landscaping. They took out like my appendix. They took out like a whole bunch of stuff that was just in there, some lymph nodes and stuff like that. And I was in and out of Dana-Farber every 6 weeks for 2 years. And then after 2 years, they cut me down to every, I think it was 3 or 4 months. And I did that for like another 3 years. So I was in and out of Dana-Farber a lot, just making sure that it hadn't spread, that there was nothing going on. But it was just kind of like that omnipresent reminder of what had happened. Like, you like for 5 years, you're not able to like put it away because you're constantly in
Right,
and
that
out
must
of
have
there.
been so taxing
It was
physically and
taxing.
emotionally.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So at what point in all of this did you first practice yoga?
So when I first started practicing yoga, it was actually just before then. It was probably in like my mid-20s I started practicing. And it's kind of like the classic tale. One of my girlfriends was like, hey, let's go to a yoga class. And I was kind of like, all right, whatever, I'll go to a yoga class with you. And we went and we practiced. And I had the experience that I think so many people have at the end of class that often brings them back. I was just like, I don't know what the hell just happened, but I like that. And I want to do that again. And we walked out and I was just like enamored with it. I was like, this is amazing. She looks at me, she's like, that's trash. I'm never going to do that again. And I was like, what? This is amazing. So I started practicing pretty religiously for a good, I don't think I did a teacher training for a good like 7 or 8 years. And I just was practicing probably 3 or 4 times a week or so.
Can you describe exactly that moment afterwards? Because I recently went to a sound bath actually at your studio, and I had that exact same feeling.
Yeah.
I don't know what the heck just happened, but I felt hypnotized and I feel so much better.
Yeah.
What exactly did you feel like after that first yoga class?
So that was the thing. It was like I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt like a clear channel. Like it felt like something that had been in me that was like disrupted, or I don't want to say disrupted, but just like it like calmed my mind for a hot second. And I was like, I like that feeling. I want to do that again.
Okay.
Because I mean, I think we all live with, there's just like chatter in your brain all day long. And to have an hour where you're just like, I don't have to listen to that. Like I was like, that's good stuff. I'll drink that Kool-Aid.
So when did you really start having the idea that you wanted to teach yoga, not just practice it?
I practiced for quite some time, and then I decided I'm going to fly to California and I'm going to do a yoga teacher training, but I didn't want to teach. Like I had no desire to teach. We would have to every single day when we were in school, we had a notebook that we would have to journal on, and we would talk about what we were learning in yoga teacher training and how we would apply it to teaching. And the first line of every single one of my entries was like, I will never teach a yoga class, but if I had to, and then, I write about it. So I went there just because I wanted to know about it. Like, I think, when I was a school teacher, what I taught was math. And I think my brain always works with like, I want to know the why behind something. Like, sure, that feels good, but like, I want to quantify it. Like, tell me why this works. So that's why I did the training, because I was like, I want to know what the heck's happening in that room that makes me feel like this. I want to know what like the science is behind that.
Okay. Now you own a yoga studio.
Yeah.
So when did you decide to not only teach, but own a yoga studio?
So I had been practicing at Three Bridges amongst some other studios, and the founders of the studio, Bjorn and Jody Turnquist, I had been practicing there, and Bjorn had known that I had taken a training, and he just kind of came up to me one day, and he was like, "Hey, Steph, would you want to do a demo and see if you want to teach?" And I'm like, "Nope, like that's not for me, but thank you, very honored." And then I kind of started thinking about it a little bit more, and I went back to him and I was like, yeah, I'll do a demo for you. So he says, okay. So I'm kind of going into it a little bit like with my head fluffed up. I'm like, he asked me to do this. Like, I got this. So I go and I sit, and he's sitting in front of me, and I go to start teaching him. And I think I spoke for 3 minutes, and he was like, nope, absolutely not. And I was like, excuse you. I was like, what? He's like, no, you got to fix this. You got to fix this. You got to fix this. Like, that's not right. And I was like, then it almost like lit a fire under me, because I was like, don't tell me I can't do this. I was like, I can do this. I'll do this better than you. So I went back and I fixed whatever he wanted me to fix. And I went back and did another demo for him. And him in his very sweet and kind of like nonchalant manner was like, yeah, all right, you'll be fine. You can teach. So I was like, all right. So I started teaching a little bit and I loved it. Like I wasn't expecting to enjoy it that much, and I was not a great teacher. Anybody that took classes from me 10 years ago or whatever, I wasn't a great teacher, but I loved it. Like I absolutely loved it, and I loved being able to facilitate and to be in space with people where you watch them like breathe their first breath, and you can see people like it's this like palpable feeling, and it was, to me, it was such an honor to be able to hold space for people like that I was like, I'll do that more. So I just kept teaching more and more and more and more. And he and his wife, gosh, I think I've owned the studio now for 8 years or so, 7 or 8 years. I know. We were talking, he and I are still quite close. We were talking the other day, and I've officially owned it longer than he and his wife did. They moved down to Florida. And they were interested in leaving, and they asked me, they're like, hey, do you want to buy the studio? And I was kind of like, I have no business sense. I've never taken a business class in my life. I'm just a yoga teacher. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So I end up buying the business and immediately have like deep imposter syndrome. I didn't tell anybody I own the studio. I still have people occasionally come up to me and they're like, I just found out you own this place. I'm like, I do own this place. But it was tough because, I was still like on the younger end of a teacher. And when I say zero business background, so it was scary and it was overwhelming. But I also knew that the work that we were doing in there was so important that I was like, I can figure out how to do QuickBooks and run a website and do all that stuff. And here we are.
Here we are, 8 years later.
Yeah.
What's the most fulfilling part of not only being a teacher but owning a studio?
That's a great question. The most fulfilling part is it's definitely the people that come there. So that includes like the staff as well. But watching what happens to people before and after a yoga class it's the biggest honor to me to see the changes that people go through. And we're lucky, like the Seacoast area, it's such a sweet community and it's small. I know you always say I know everybody. It's just because there's just like 100 people that live here. They're all in the room. But seeing the changes that take place in people from like the first time that you meet them to after teaching them for a year, 2 years, or 5 years. And it happens to me at least a couple times a week. I'll get letters from people, or like they'll write into like Instagram or the info at email, and they'll tell you like what's been going on in their life, and maybe they've lost someone recently, or they've been going through big relationship changes or house changes or whatever it is. And they talk about how important the studio is to them and how much it's like their safe haven. To me, I'm like, that's the best thing in the world, to be able to provide some sort of calm and solace to people in this like absolutely crazy world that we live in. Like that's powerful. I'll do that all day long.
You're very much known around here as being a giver. You're always willing to give your time to people. You're always willing to lend a helping hand. Do you ever get overwhelmed, or does it ever get too stressful knowing that you represent so much for so many people?
Sometimes, yeah. I think sometimes I'm not great with an off switch. Like I'm not great with an off switch, and I need to learn to like my goal this year was to like start taking half a day off a week. Like that's ridiculous. Like you should probably take more days off than that. But I always worry a little bit that like we're all humans and we all have human tendencies and we all experience the full range of human emotions. And I always get nervous that people are going to see me as this person that teaches yoga and like that's all that I am. And it's not all encompassing, because I have bad days. I have days where I'm crabby. I have days when I cry. I have days when, things are tough. And I never give myself like the grace of being human and understanding that everybody else is going to understand that we all go through the same things, and I don't have to be perfect, and I don't have to always put on this like yoga face, and that I can just be who I am.
I got away from your backstory a little bit. Let's go back to that.
All right.
You bought a farm at some point, right?
I did.
Okay, why? What happened there? This is a theme in your life. You do these crazy things on a whim without giving any thought to it.
So I was living in Boston. I was living in the Back Bay. Really lovely, just kind of like a standard like apartment thing. And my family has always had a nice little place up in Long Sands on York Beach. So I always enjoyed coming to Maine. And every time I went over like the big bridge, we always called it the big bridge when we were little, I always just felt like this exhale. It was just like, So I was living in Boston, things were kind of crazy. And I was like, why don't I move up to Maine? So I started looking at real estate up here, and I found this house in Berwick. It was a 10.5 acre, actually it was an old apple orchard, so I had 40 apple trees. And I bought this house and I moved there.
And how old are you at this point?
33,
Okay.
34. 33,
Okay.
34, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Okay.
And I bought that house. I had 6 chickens. I had bees. At that point, I had a corgi for 16 years. He was just love of my life. I had a cat too. And I lived there for the first 3 or 4 years that I lived up here. Whitney, one of my dear friends, bought a house right across the street from me, I think it was 6 weeks after. It was a really, really close period of time. So after we met actually through the studio, and we realized we lived across the street from each other, it was like I loved living over there, even though it was in the middle of nowhere and there was really like no other reason to be out there. We just had such a good time being neighbors over there that I lived there for quite some time. I sold that house, and then I moved to Kittery.
Okay. There seems to be kind of it's funny how cyclical everything in life is. There seems to be, obviously, I'm very anti-technology. If any of you listen to the podcast, I'm addicted to my phone, but I'm anti-technology. Make it make sense. Because I'm all about human connection and whatnot. But there seems to be a big pushback toward that. We all know we're being duped. We all know we're addicted to these things, but we can't stop ourselves. But we want to take the power back. And one way people are doing that is like, let me just go out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Let me move away from the city. Let me buy up land. Let me get some chickens and live the way that people used to. Would you recommend that experience? Did you enjoy it?
I loved it.
Did it get lonely?
It was, yeah. So, you are kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Like mowing the lawn took me 8 hours. So that was just like, I was like, I can't just
You push mower, right? You were a push mower gal?
absolutely.
Good.
Just up and down.
Respect.
But yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think we are really, really fortunate where we live, even if you're in the Portsmouth, the Kittery, kind of the seacoasty area. But living in the middle of the nowhere, it kind of provides this lens for you to stop worrying about all the stuff around and figure out how to enjoy your life just on your own, which is, I don't think that's easy for people. We rely a lot on all this stuff around us, but I think when you take the time to kind of disconnect from that, you realize you can make a pretty happy life for yourself just with the stuff that you have.
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. It's fantastic. And there's some section in there where he says that people who live in the cities are actually the unhappiest. And he said there was a study conducted of the 318 cities in America, the 318th happiest city was New York City, the supposed best city in the world.
Really?
It's something about the people who live there don't necessarily report that they're unhappy, but it's subconscious. It's an underlying anxiety because there's so many people. There's underlying comparison syndrome happening. There's just the noise, the sheer noise. We are not meant as human beings to live surrounded by all this noise all the time. And then you go to somewhere remote, you go for a hike, the mountains, you live out on the farm, and that noise just disappears.
Yeah.
And it's so peaceful, and you can actually listen to your heartbeat, which is such a wonderful feeling, which you don't get living in a big, noisy city.
Yeah. That's what I love. I'm a big proponent of being out in the woods. I love hiking. I love skiing. Anything to get you away from all of this stuff and to dive into this. I like that.
Being present is key, and I think being present, it's the hardest thing to do. Is there something that yoga teachers say that, for anyone who doesn't know, Shavasana is kind of the resting pose, the final pose you do, where you're just laying on the floor doing nothing. And that's actually the hardest pose to do because it forces you to be completely still and try to think and just try to clear your mind as well. And it's incredibly hard to do because we, like you said, we have so many things going on in our heads.
I feel like that pose, like you can look around the room and you can see like, yeah, people's bodies are still, but it's so hard for people to turn off like all the chatter that goes on upstairs. And I think things like yoga, things like meditation, or whatever your meditation is, like maybe your meditation is skiing, maybe your meditation is hiking, whatever it is. But when you find those modalities that help you find a little bit of space between the chatter in your head, that's where you find peace. Like it's really, really hard to be peaceful. And I think it's really hard to be happy when you're constantly listening to and talking to all the stuff that goes on upstairs in your head.
How do you be present? How do you cultivate that?
I don't know. No. I always talk about, I feel like, and it's interesting, I feel like especially in my like yoga teaching, things kind of shift, and I feel like I'm on a shift right now towards like substantially more simple thoughts. I think being present is teaching yourself to like be where your feet are planted and to stop talking to the stuff that's in your head. To me, that's like the simplest equation to make yourself present. Teach your mind to be where your body is. Teach your mind to stop talking to your mind.
How do you do that?
I know,
That
right?
sounds difficult.
That's like the dichotomy of yoga. Everything like on paper, it sounds super easy. You're like, oh yeah, why aren't I doing that? And then in theory, when you go out to do it, it's like, oh, we're not doing that because it's hard and it's a lot easier just to distract yourself and to look on social media and to be constantly doing the things.
So, you got rid of the farm.
Yep.
You bought a house in Kittery. How did you buy this house in Kittery? Are there any policemen in this audience? Okay, we good? Okay.
So I sold the house and I wanted to be closer to work because I work in Portsmouth. So I was looking around in Kittery and I'm looking around and I can't find anything to buy. So I'm like, all right, I'll just rent a place for right now. So Whit actually found me this, we called it the Fairy House, found this beautiful house and it was a little bit out of my price range for rent. And I was kind of like, you know what? I don't care. I'm such a homebody. I like to be in a space that feels good. So I start renting this place and I'm continuing my search to look for another property to buy. Well, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever comes around, and I don't find anything. So I look around at the neighbors' houses and I look up and see how much they're worth. And I kind of choose a price for my house. And I called the people, my landlords that owned it. And I was like, hi, I want to buy your house and this is my offer. And they were like, the house isn't for sale. And I was like, just think about it. Literally, like the next day, they called me back. They're like, yeah, you can buy our house. I was like, great. How do we do that legally? So I call up my friend who's in real estate, and he was like, Steph, you can't just put offers on homes. Like, that's not how it works. And I was like, well, I'm going to need you to make this like legal for me. He was like, okay, cool. So that's how I ended up buying that house. Just got to ask for what you want sometimes.
You know what? Yeah, manifest. You got to put it out there.
Yeah. I was literally like, take this. And it worked out well. I got a good price on it.
Oh my God, I love that. We're running out of time with you, so there's one more thing that I can think of that I want to ask you. So you got divorced at some point in your 30s, and we all have, especially today, like my generation is, at this era in my life, like everyone is so obsessed with getting married and figuring out that, like you said, you're at 26, oh, I'm old, I need to have my shit figured out. Mm-hmm. And so we get stressed out. So we get into relationships that we probably shouldn't be in. We make decisions that we know aren't best for ourselves, but we feel like society tells us we need to have it all figured out by 30, so I'm going to go do it. You were the same way, and you actually got divorced in your mid-30s.
Yeah.
So when that happened, what was going through your mind? Did you think like, oh my God, I'm a failure?
Yeah, so that was tough too. That was another tough piece. So I got married, I think I was 34. I should know this, but I don't. Somewhere 33, 34-ish, maybe, yeah. And I had been dating somebody, we got engaged, and, not to talk poorly about him, but I do think it was at a point in my life when we started dating, I think I was 30 or 31 or so. And to me, I was like, I'm old. Like, and I remember thinking that for a long time. I remember like when I moved back from California thinking, well, I'm 26, I got to go to Ann Taylor and like buy all the clothes and like just buck up. Like, this is my life now. And I remember like year after year after year thinking like, I'm old. You've got to do this stuff. You have to make these decisions. And in my head, I was kind of like, well, this is the time to get married. So got married, had, we were married. It was like a flash in the pan. I want to say maybe like a year or two, maybe a couple years. And when I finally made the decision to exit the marriage and to get a divorce, it was, to me, like that was the pivotal point, because up into that, when I was trying to make that decision, I was like, wow, you're old. Like, how are you going to start dating at 36? It's absurd. Like, you should always be, well, never mind. But I remember thinking like, wow, I'm old and I'm going to have to like go back out into the dating pool. And this just feels awkward and uncomfortable. And when I finally got a divorce and I was by myself for, a good period of time, that was when I realized my entire life, I guess, adult life, I had been thinking I was too old and it was too late for everything that I had done. And I was like, if you erase that from your head, what would you choose to do? And that's when I felt like a whole lot opened up in just a different way for me, because I was like, even at this, I'm 43 now. And I mean, sure, it glimmers through my head every once in a while, but I'm like, my biggest takeaway from my life so far is like, you're not too old and it is not too late. So do the things that make you happy, because you're the only person that's responsible for your happiness. So go figure out what it is that's going to make you happy and then do it.
Screw the timeline, people.
Yes.
That's what I always say.
Yes.
Forget about this timeline, which, by the way, this timeline was set in like the 1970s when people were croaking out at like age 65, 70. So let's push back these, you're 43. That's
43.
ridiculous. You look 31.
Thank you. That's very kind. A good hairdresser.
We won't. Yes, we won't end on the divorce note. You just got you just got re-engaged.
I just got engaged. Yeah, very, very happy. Like, yeah.
When's
very,
the wedding?
very happy.
Where are we all going?
So we're all gonna go to Mexico February 1st next year. Yeah. So Nick and I started dating. It was a little over 4 years ago, and it was such a different relationship from anything that I had ever experienced before. So that's why, like, my main point to you is do what feels right to you, because if you let yourself just do the things that are kind of like half-assed, you're not going to find real happiness. And we're so happy. It's good.
But
so everyone's invited to the wedding.
Woo. But he's not here tonight.
He's
Shame
not
on
here
you,
tonight.
Nick.
No,
Unbelievable.
he's working.
Well, Stephanie, thank you very much for being here tonight. Everyone, please go to Three Bridges Yoga. You've got a free coupon, so no excuses. Go support Stephanie. Give her a follow on Instagram. She posts amazing cat content every day. You won't regret it. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.